Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Brother Telepathy. I'm Micah. That's my brother Graham. We are doing a 2025 NFL offseason free agency grades. Free agency is kind of wrapping up, but we're getting to the latter end of the free agency. All the big moves have mostly been done. We're still awaiting a few to come through here in the next couple of days, but we're pretty much wrapping it up. So we're gonna go ahead and put some grades on some teams and what we thought they did in this free agency cycle. Graham, you got any thoughts?
Only thing I'll say is that we highlighted, of course, a few individual moves with the first kind of big wave of free agency. So if you haven't checked out that video, go ahead. But any specifics on any big signings in the first couple of days we talked about in that last video. So we probably won't highlight too many of those in this video, but more so just as a team overall, how do we think they fared this free agency cycle?
Yeah, good distinction to make there. You want to start with the Cardinals here?
Yeah, sure. So I gave the Cardinals a B on this one. I feel like this is a solid offseason cycle for them. I think the re-signing of Zay Jones is totally fine. I like the re-signing of Baron Browning is one that I pointed out in our last video. So I like that one. And then I do think the addition of Josh Sweat was a good move for them just to shore up that D line a little bit further, get probably one of the most coveted players during this cycle. So yeah, I mean, didn't make a ton of moves, I would say, overall, but I like the ones that a few of those that they did make, I do like in particular. So nothing crazy, but I think the Josh Sweat one puts it over the hump a little bit for me on this one.
Yeah, and kind of the grading scale that I'm going off of, at least. Maybe you can speak to what you're doing, or if you agree. I'm kind of taking teams where they're at, and then basing their free agency off of the type of direction they're headed. So a team like the Cardinals, kind of up in the air, maybe competing in the division, maybe not. If you're maybe, let's say, a good team who's wanting to compete and you make some moves that really put you in that category, you're going to get a higher grade from me. If you're a bad team and you make some moves that maybe help you get out of the mud a little bit, I'm going to give you a decent grade. So Cardinals are kind of like a so-so team, and their grade reflects that with what they did in free agency. I'm going to echo everything you said. Josh Sweat, I think, is a fine move. Dalvin Tomlinson, more of an underrated player. Don't love the contract, but I think he's going to help up that D-line. And then the reason I didn't go higher is because of the linebacking core. I think that's the worst part of their team, and they didn't do enough for me to warrant a higher grade than a C plus. So that was the reason for that.
I will say, I think with linebackers specifically, like we talked about in our last video, not a lot of the higher end linebackers hit the market this year. A lot of them got retained by their team. So I think that is part of the problem a little bit but I would agree with what you said there.
Yeah,
So,
and a lot of it you just can't help. That's just the reality of how it played out, how free agency is.
right.
So it's
Yeah.
that might just be the problem for them. But
Yeah.
I'll start with the Falcons here.
Yeah, go
Same
for
thing.
it.
I went with a C there for the grade. A C for me is kind of just like you didn't really move me in any direction, which is basically it's perfectly average, which is fine in some cases. Atlanta Falcons division, in my mind, this is a team that's going to compete for the division, probably should win it. I think bringing back Jake Matthews is a big deal. I'm not super fond of any of these other moves. Mike Hughes is like an okay corner. 3 years for him is like eh. Diablo is kind of like whatever as well. I think he's a fine linebacker, but overall just a C. I don't have a ton to say here.
Yeah, I'll say that kind of what you were talking about earlier. I think the Falcons really had a chance to, again, not the best free agent class in general, but at the end of the day, I think this offseason allows them to really solidify being the best team in the division, at least up there. Of course, the Bucks are in there too. So I think the Leonard Floyd signing was good. 1 year, 10 mil, not too bad there. I like the extension of Jake Matthews. Other than that, though, they just didn't do anything to wow me and really attempt to further get them over the hump, especially in the edge market, particular. So I'm sure they'll address that in the draft, but didn't move me too much on with the Falcons.
Yeah, looking back, I probably could have been a little bit more strict on this one. I think as I kind of went through these grades and we put them in, this one I probably could have revisited more of a D plus C minus team. But that's fine. We'll move on to the next one. Baltimore Ravens, the smallest of the free agencies so far. Graham,
So
give me your
far,
thoughts.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the D Hop signing is fine. Not much you're paying him there. It's older guy, probably not going to play a ton of snaps for you, but at the end of the day, he's a guy who's reliable and somebody who's going to be a third down guy, need to move the stick, something like that. I think the best signing here, of course, is obviously retaining Ronnie Stanley. I think that's pretty clear. Good contract, I would say, for somebody who played at his caliber that he did last year. So, they didn't do a ton. And, maybe that could be where some of the negativity comes from in this grade is maybe they could have done a little more, again, particularly maybe in the edge market. But I think retaining Ronnie Stanley was the best move here, pretty pretty far and away.
Yeah, D Hop to me is a nothing move. I mean, like a maybe red zone threat is kind of like what his role is.
Just kind
Patrick
of the point he's at in
Ricard,
his career.
yeah, I mean, yeah, that's just where he's at. Patrick Ricard re-signing, cool. I mean, like there's only like a handful of teams that really utilize a fullback. Ravens obviously being one of them. So that's a fine signing. And then Ben Cleveland. Actually, I'm gonna go opposite side of the offensive line for you. Mauler there on the inside. So I really like Ben Cleveland a lot, and I think that's a good re-signing as well. We'll transition to the next one here with the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, some moves here. I know last time again we talked about kind of an underrating signing. Last video, I should say, would be the Josh Palmer signing. I like they re-signed Khalil Shakir to the deal that he got as well, and then they retained Greg Rousseau. Also, obviously extended Josh Allen. So a lot of their big players they kind of extended or looked to retain. So that was good. Obviously there, Terrell Bernard, also another guy on there too. So in terms of who they acquired, I would say obviously they aided their edge rushing room a little bit. They got Joey Bosa, one of the higher name guys. Not a ton of production recently, and again, he's getting up there in age. So I don't know if it's a needle mover at this point, but I think it's a good enough move to kind of bolster that room a little bit. And then Michael Hoyt, I think is how you would pronounce that name as well. He is kind of an underrated signing, I think, also. Unfortunately, he actually came out with a 6-game suspension for PEDs. I don't know if you saw that, but there's another guy on this list too who's same boat, and they actually were aware of Hoyt. They weren't aware of the other guy, and I think they mentioned they wouldn't have signed them both if they had known prior to. But either way, I think that's a decent signing, and I still think they're going to look to hit their edge or D line in the draft this cycle. So
Yeah, and I do like what they did with the D line. I think Greg Rousseau re-signing is a big deal for them. He kind of came alive towards the end of the year. I liked what he did and what he brought to the team. And then I think Khalil Shakir. You know what? Same thing I talked about before. The grades get better as they go on. I could have went higher than C on this one. No, Khalil Shakir is like one of my favorite receivers in the NFL. And I think he signed a phenomenal deal. I think that's super good value for the Bills, and I think that he's going to be their Josh Allen security blanket. Obviously, the Josh Allen re-signing as well is a big deal. I could have went higher on this, but a lot of so-so moves for a team that's competing or should be competing kind of just sticks me to C here. But so we'll live with that. Carolina Panthers, though, there's a lot of interesting things going on here because they have the J.C. Horn deal. They obviously are trying to do everything they can to bolster up that defense, which is obviously the worst part of their team. Trevon Moehrig is kind of like a we'll see signing. I don't really know how to feel about that, but if that contract reflects the player he's going to be, then I think it'll end up working out. Pat Jones, former Viking. I think he's a solid player. It seems like all the former Vikings flock to the Carolina Panthers, so I think he's fine. I think he helps out the edge room, more of like a 3-4 defensive end. So we'll see what it turns out to, but B- for me. I think it's a solid move.
Yeah, I think honestly my favorite move on this was extending J.C. Horn when they did. And, we've seen it happen with the Bengals and the Cowboys and these other teams that don't get ahead of the curve on re-signing their big name players. You end up setting the market, which is what you want to do because then, obviously you'll have to reset the market if somebody else gets paid. So they got this done before, Pat Surtain and some other these guys who are going to, again, reset the market at the next point here when they get Sauce Gardner was the other one I was thinking of. They're gonna now set the market for corners, and so he's not played a ton of football. Well, I mean, he's played some football, but again, he's had a lot of injury concerns, and so that scares you a little bit. But when he's on the field, he's a great player, and again, I think it was smart to go ahead and get that deal done while they could, early. I think that's proven to be beneficial.
Yeah.
And then. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously if they would have signed Milton Williams like they were reported to, this would have been a lot higher of a grade for them. But I think they did an okay job filling in the void where they could. It's kind of hard when you have to kind of reposition where you were going. And so I think they did fine in that regard. I actually like the Trayvon Moehrig signing here. So, I'd say a little better than average offseason cycle for them so far.
Yeah, Panthers not necessarily the hottest destination for looming free agents. So I think with what they had, they did well. And I like the point you brought up about J.C. Horn re-signing as well. I think that's a big move. Chicago Bears. What are your thoughts on the Bears here?
I think this was my highest grade so far, if I remember our grades correctly here. So I think the biggest thing, obviously, was shoring up their O-line. Obviously, that was one of the big things they needed to do this offseason. And so I think that they felt like the biggest impact they could make would be in the veteran market. And so they went out, traded for Jonah Jackson, Joe Tooney, and then, of course, they signed the top center on the market, Drew Dahlman, as well. And so they got some experience in there. Some guys who are going to set the culture, especially Joe Tooney, who's been around the block for a while, doing it at a very high level. So I think that trade alone is putting them in contention for one of the best off seasons of the cycle here. Deo Odabingo there for, I think he was with the Colts previously, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But young guy with some potential upside as well. We talked about Grady Jarrett a little bit too. But overall, I think the O-line, firming that up was their biggest task. And I think they've looked to do that. They should still look to develop some younger guys, I think, as well, especially at with Joe Tooney there. But I like what they did.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to fully agree with you. This is arguably one of the best off seasons for sure. I'm pretty strict on my grading, so B plus doesn't necessarily reflect not being the best, but I do like their off season. Obviously, trenches was the name of the game for them, and with Ben Johnson coming in from that Lions system, they want to bolster up the O line as much as possible, and they did that. The reason I didn't go higher than B plus was because there's a lot of moving parts at one time, and I don't really know how it's going to reflect. I mean, a lot of these guys are veteran-type players, so I don't doubt that plugging in veteran offensive linemen in a Ben Johnson system is not going to work. It does scare me a little bit, the fact that the Chiefs traded away Joe Thuney, and a lot of moving parts at one time for me gives me a little anxiety, but overall I think it's going to work out. So this could turn into an A+ grade, but for right now I'll stick it at a B+.
I think that's a fair point. When a team starts making a bunch of moves at one time, it can end up blowing up in their face. So it is kind of more putting a spotlight on your offseason. So I do understand that point. The Titans kind of did that a little bit last year, made all these big moves, and of course, not many of them have panned out so far. So I can definitely understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And then Cincinnati Bengals here. Graham, we both went D. Not much to like about this, to be honest. I think BJ Hill is their best move they did. I think retaining T. Higgins for on the tag is going to help them out, but nothing here for a team that should be competing stands out to me. And the defense could possibly be the worst in all of football next year, so I'm not loving this.
Yeah, I think this is just a great example of not good team building. There's certainly an argument to be made where, yes, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase are, they're obviously the best receiving core, or the best duo, I would say, in of course the entire NFL. But at the same time, a strong argument can be made that when you have such a high-end wide receiver 1, you don't necessarily need such a high-end wide receiver 2 to pair with that, especially when your defense is as bad as it is. So I think from a team building standpoint, I'm not sure I can fully get behind paying your tight end 1, paying your high-end wide receiver 2, and obviously your wide receiver 1 as well. And I understand they want to make their franchise quarterback happy, but at the same time, let's maybe have a conversation with him about overall team building and try
let's make him happy by staying off the or letting the defense get off the field early. That would make him happy too.
Yeah, exactly. So overall, like you said, I just don't think from a team building standpoint it makes a ton of sense. So a little harsh on this one, but again, I don't think they've made enough moves, and they should be in a win now, of course, mode with Joe Burrow at the helm.
That is an interesting point you brought up about paying someone like maybe a tight end, paying him a 3-year, $25 million deal, or T. Higgins tagging him, looking for a big deal. When you have someone like Jamar as your wide receiver 1, you can kind of plug in, when you're playing across someone that dominant, you can kind of, I don't want to say plug in just anybody because that would be a slight to T. Higgins, but I think that you're more forgiving in that wide receiver 2 role than in most scenarios. So I think it's a good point to bring up.
Especially in a class, I was just going to say, especially in a draft class where I know you particularly are pretty high on some wide receiver 2s in this class.
Yeah.
I think, again, you can't look to replace T. Higgins 1-for-1 with a rookie, receiver for the most part. But again, from a team building standpoint, your defense was horrible. Let's get some juice in there, and maybe they could have, I don't know, just give them some flexibility. We've talked about that a few times with free agency. So
yeah, and I think Andre Yoshivas actually being like the slot guy for them last year actually did a lot. And Jermaine Burton, you kind of still to be determined with him.
Yeah, it's hard to say with them, but
it's hard to say with them. But I think that there's enough to where you could feel good going into next year if you draft like a wide receiver 2. That is. But moving on, Cleveland Browns. What are you thinking?
Not much to say at this point. Again, the Browns are kind of in a weird spot because their roster isn't too bad, but at the same time, like, I don't know. It's hard to say whether great quarterback play is going to impact them a lot or not, frankly. So, I think that they probably will acquire another veteran at some point, whether that be a trade with Kirk Cousins at this juncture here, whether they do land Russ potentially. Whatever the case is, I think retaining Myles Garrett, is kind of a double-edged sword again from the standpoint of you did get the best player in football back on your roster, but it could have given them a potentially good chance to kind of reset a little bit by if they would have traded him. So they could have got a haul back, of course, for that one, obviously. So I think it's just meh at this point. And then of course you acquired Kenny Pickett too. To me, that just screams contingency plan, like backup plan, if you will. They the fact they traded for Kenny Pickett is kind of wild to me, but
Yeah.
young guy, he's got some experience like we talked about in our other videos. So it's just kind of meh for me at this point.
Yeah, Miles Garrett, obviously, the only thing really worth noting on this entire list. I mean, like, you brought up a good point as well. Like, do you trade him and kind of hit the reset for a team that's picking second in the draft, or do you like re-sign one of the best players in football? I don't think there's necessarily a wrong option because if you re-sign him, then you're
Right.
retaining one of the best players in football, and if not,
That's
then you're
why I
getting
say
a
it's
haul.
that double-edged sword, right?
So it's kind of just like a so-so move for me. I would probably lean like team building. I don't think that they're in a place to where they need to compete. So probably not, or probably the reason why I didn't go higher than C plus. And then Kenny Pickett, I've been screaming that this team is not going to take a quarterback. And I think given the Miles Garrett interview, where I don't know if you saw this or not,
Yeah,
where
I
he
saw
talked
it.
about he kind of knows what's going to happen, that would imply that either they're taking somebody at 2 or that their quarterback is already on the roster. And by his expressions, it would allude that the guy is already on the roster. So at least that's how I interpreted it. But yeah, so I think that just a C plus overall, nothing to stand out about them. So
Yeah.
um,
Pretty harsh on the Cowboys here, but honestly, I think this is one of the few teams where they actually got worse in the offseason, personally. Like, you talked about the moves that you liked for Dallas here, but and I say Javonte Williams is a pretty good deal as well. I got the contract wrong in our last video for Javonte Williams. I think this is a much more obviously affordable contract for him on this one here. Still a guy with some upside who's young, but the trades that for some reason the Cowboys just love, and people have made this point online, just love getting like former first round guys who have just kind of been washed or just underperformed, and so that trend has continued throughout this cycle here. So to me, honestly, this is one of the worst free agent or one of the worst offseason acquisition cycle teams for me so far at this point.
yeah, for a destination as hot as Dallas, I think until Jerry, maybe maybe
Changes
is
the
no is
oh,
no
well,
longer
okay,
there.
yeah.
Yeah, that's my
For
no.
one
I
way,
was
those are
I was
never-
going
yeah.
different direction. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Until Jerry's
that's the only
no longer
That's
there.
the only way he's out is
Exactly.
what you're alluding to. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Until Jerry's out, I know one of my friends is a big Cowboys fan. He talks about until Jerry World bites the dust, the team's not going to change, and this is reflecting in that. Never been a team to spend big in free agency. They're really into their homegrown players. Kyrie
Which I can
Elam is
respect,
like,
but if you are going to make moves, like let's not get worse.
right, yeah, 100%. I think re-signing Oso Digazua is a big deal, so I think that bolsters them up
Yeah.
quite a bit. You
Yeah.
already touched on Javonte Williams. I think that just bringing in talent on the offensive side is good. I just don't think they brought in enough talent, really,
Well,
anywhere.
And the last point I'll make too is again, this is the flip side of what we were talking about with J.C. Horn. Now you've just waited so long on paying Micah Parsons, you're going to have to almost reset the market with him as well. So it's
Yeah.
like it's a trend. You got to pay your good players early because you know that you're going to get them for a deal when it's all said and done. So again, that's another knock here.
I think so. I think going back to the Bengals real quick, someone had already talked about if they had paid Jamar what he asked for originally, I think they would have been saving like almost $10 million a year just on the
Yep.
Jamar contract. And
Yep.
that is maybe something that the Cowboys need to look long and hard at. Is they need to say like, hey, let's just go ahead and get Micah paid. Someone who's in their mid-20s, prime of their career, still has another, maybe 10 years in the NFL. Let's just lock up one of these guys. So I don't really know what they're doing, but yeah, D plus for me.
Pretty bad. Flip side, though, the Broncos, I think, have had a very strong offseason cycle so far. Now, I think the reason this is a B plus for me is that some of these moves are a bit more high risk. You're talking about Dre Greenlaw, you're talking about Hufanga. These are guys that are coming off of injuries. Now, if they play up to their standard, I think it's going to be, again, a scary defense. But overall, I think this is one of the best offseason so far for some teams here, especially if these signings, of course, pan out, which you could say for a lot of these teams. But
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of echo you here. I think that the defense, high risk, high reward players. Obviously, Hufanga being an All Pro. I believe he was an All Pro 2 years ago. Either that or a Pro Bowler.
He was All-Pro, yeah.
All Pro level player when he's healthy. And then same for Dre Greenlaw, another guy who's got some familiarity in that 49ers defense with Hufanga. But and then I also think Evan Ingram could be a sneaky signing. I think that could end up being, for my fantasy guys, that's like a tight end one, sneaky tight end one next year. So we'll see about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say two more quick points in the Broncos. That one, did you see that Evan Ingram posted that GIF of Joker, like the Dark Knight? And I know that you and I have hinted. It was on Twitter. I know you and I have hinted at like Sean Payton talking about getting his Joker this offseason.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe he told Evan Ingram, "You're my Joker." You know, who knows?
Interesting.
We'll see. And then just quickly wanted to shout out Trent Sherfield. This is a guy that I like a lot as a wide receiver 3 in the NFL. He's had spent some time, I think, with the Vikings, right? He spent some time with
Last
the
year,
49ers, with the Dolphins. He's just a solid receiver, in my opinion. Again, nothing crazy. He's not going to give you a ton of production, but a good wide receiver 3.
He's a good locker. I mean, it's going to sound like such a slight as well, but like it's really important. He's a great locker room guy. He's a willing blocker. Like he does all the little things right, which is exactly what you want in your wide receiver 3 or 4. You just want someone who's going to be consistent. Like that's your main thing with that role is you just want consistency from them. And Trent Sherfield is a great consistent player. So Denver Broncos B+ for us. Detroit Lions. This one I have as a C. I'm not super keen on really anything they did. I mean, like for a team that should be one of the favorites, if not the favorite, to win the Super Bowl next year, I just don't think they did enough. And I think that DJ Reed helps on that 3-year deal that he signed, but I'm not in love with any of the other moves they made.
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit higher than I should have been in hindsight, but I really like the DJ Reed signing, as I alluded to in our last video, is probably one of my favorite individual acquisitions of this cycle. So maybe that's why I had it bumped up a little bit. I think this could have been a little bit lower of a grade looking back on it here, but I really like the DJ Reed signing.
Actually, looking back at this, Marcus Davenport is like a sneaky 1-year deal. He has been terrible for the past 2 years. Former Viking, didn't play because of injury. Last year, whenever he was needed, didn't play because of injury. So 1 year for $5 million for him. If he ends up being great, then this could be a really solid deal. Or if he plays, I should say. When he plays, he's usually pretty good. But it's just a matter of staying in the field. So that's a decent signing for them to give them one highlight for the C grade. And then Green Bay Packers, again, not a lot going on here. Them and the Ravens were pretty quiet. But this one kind of levels out for me at a C. Young team. The direction is obviously like they're in a place where they could compete for the division. Tough division. But like I said, it's a young team, so they're building around that. And then Aaron Banks, not super fond of the deal. But Nate Hobbs, I am pretty fond of. I think it's a really great deal. So for me, it kind of just levels out. Stick him to C.
You took the words out of my mouth there. There's the brother telepathy showing up. Yeah, this is a net even grade for me because as much as I dislike the Aaron Banks move, I equally like the Nate Hobbs move.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I just land on a C just for those couple reasons there. So
And I think that that's the perfect explanation. I don't think there needs to be much else said, and I think Packers fans would agree.
I agree with that. Yep, Houston Texans here. This is a weird team for me to evaluate because, again, they're kind of in that very clearly best team in the division at this point here. They should be, pretty locked to win that. I would say I don't have much faith in the Jaguars, and, we know the Titans are not good either, and the Colts, I think, or whatever. But, again, it sounds like they really want to change the identity in that offensive line room, and they've done that by, of course, trading Laramie Tunzel in kind of a surprise move there. They've ended up cutting several of their offensive linemen. They traded Kenyon Green to the Eagles for C.J. Gardner-Johnson, so I think that's an okay move. But, again, if you're talking about improving your locker room and then bringing C.J. Gardner-Johnson in there, that's kind of an interesting thing to
Interesting
talk
dichotomy
about.
there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Christian Kirk also, I think, is actually a pretty decent deal. I think Christian Kirk is a solid player, and again, could maybe be kind of that slot guy for them, while Tank Dell is still obviously going to be out for a little bit. I don't know. I didn't love what they did, and I'm not sure. The offensive line was such an issue. I'm not sure tearing it completely to ground zero is the best idea.
Yeah.
But they really want to change that room around. So maybe that is the best way to go about it. I don't know.
I mean, this screams offensive line at 24 for them in the draft, or 20, wherever they pick in, somewhere in the mid to early 20s.
Yeah, I think it's around 23 or something.
It might be 23. Yeah. I think they pick one before the Vikings, but yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I don't the same way. This is like the opposite of the Bears, where the Bears are kind of going like super. We're bringing in everybody, and the Texans are like, yeah, we're just gonna get rid of everybody and suck complete cheeks
and not make anything. Yeah,
they're gonna be so bad. And I think that the grade for me D plus. They didn't do anything that wows me. Again, you already mentioned it. They're in a position to win the division, and I think the offensive line moves they made are getting them worse. And then I really don't care for any of the trades they made. You said you like Christian Kirk. I'm actually going to disagree with you. I don't care for it too much. I think it's not going to help you out enough.
Sure.
Gosh, that offense is going to be bad now, dude, unless they make some major changes in the next month. But yeah, I'm not in love with Christian Kirk. I don't love the CJ Gardner trade. And then obviously I saw Ed Ingram since that 2022 class with the Vikings. So nightmarish class and not a great player. Also with some character concerns from college. So they're
That's
just
interesting too.
They're bringing in a lot of
not aware of
interesting.
that.
Yeah, they're bringing a lot of interesting players here, none of which I'm super fond of. So
Yeah,
we'll go ahead and keep
I
it
could have been
pushing.
even a little lower. I'm not sure about that, but
Yeah, I mean he's been fine since, but just
I
not
don't
in
know.
love with the offseason.
Well, again, the moves themselves have just not been, anything special. And again, is that the best way to go about it? Is to completely tear it down and then do nothing yet? I mean, again,
We'll see.
maybe they're drafting 3 out of their 4 draft picks in O line or who knows? But
They probably should.
yeah. Colts here. I think this is a better offseason, of course, but I think that they did some good moves in their secondary. Travarius Ward, we both agreed, was one of the better signings of the cycle so far. Cam Bynum, they got maybe a little bit hefty in the contract there on that one, and then we talked about Daniel Jones a little bit too. But I think it was good for them to get some competition in there. I maybe am on the the minority there of what people are saying about bringing Daniel Jones in there. But I think for the sheer fact of that, Chris Ballard talked about they need to bring in competition, and they haven't done a good job of that. And he was self-aware enough to admit that. And so I think that following with that philosophy, I think that some of these moves make sense. And again, maybe they could have done a little bit more. But I think based on what they've done so far, I think it's a decent offseason.
Yeah, and I think that again, and I'll touch on it really quick. The secondary I think is big for them, and that's ultimately why I gave them a B minus. I talked about it in the other video that we just did with the initial signings. I said Daniel Jones is a lose-lose situation for them. Either Daniel Jones becomes your franchise, or at least becomes an expiring contract to which you need to make a decision on if he starts. And then if that's the case, Anthony Richardson's not the guy. And then if Anthony Richardson's not the guy, then you're in the cycle again. So this is a lose-lose situation for me. Unless, I guess the other possibility is Anthony Richardson just turns into a beast and doesn't throw sub-50 completion percentage next year. But
I was going to say that's what they're banking on, is that this competition is going to kind of light a fire under his butt here, and he kind of gets things rolling. So we'll see.
And I think that maybe this move with Daniel Jones isn't the quarterback that I was expecting them to do, which I guess they've already had Gardner Minshew at this point and Joe Flacco, so I don't even know what other free agent quarterbacks could have been in this spot. But I'm not, it's a fine offseason, and I think they did what they set out to do, so can't be too mad at it. Jacksonville, give me your thoughts.
Jacksonville, and again, this is kind of the theme for a lot of these teams, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact, to be totally fair, that this is not a great free agent class, and I know we've said that a few different times here. Overall, the best move in my opinion on this one is obviously Jordan Lewis. I think he's going to be a staple for them in the nickel, like we talked about. Everything else is just kind of like I think De'Ami Brown is a decent signing there, considering they did lose Christian Kirk. I think it's better that they got, a guy who could probably provide them some equal productions, a bit younger and a lot cheaper. So I think that's a decent move as well, but nothing really earth-shattering in my opinion here on this one.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted because I was looking up the offensive coordinator's name again. I couldn't remember his name. You know me with my names. It's
Yes.
especially bad because he's a former Viking. So Mr. Grant
Udinsky?
Yeah. Grant Udinsky. No, I think that what they did, I mean, C+, obviously, Jordan Lewis being the best move. I mean, nobody really cares about the Vikings tight end 3, Johnny Munt, becoming a Jaguar. So, like, moves like that are kind of just like, what are you even going to talk about? But I think bringing in familiarity with Nick Mullins, former Viking, Johnny Munt, former Viking, maybe just guys who know the Grant Udinsky system a little bit, the Viking system, going to that, obviously the Jaguars are kind going to be in that direction with him being the OC. And then Liam Cohen calling the plays, or at the helm, I should say. I think it's fine. I mean, C plus, obviously not a ton to talk about, but I like the Jordan Lewis signing. So
Yeah.
we keep it pushing. Kansas City Chiefs. I think that I gave this one a C. Yeah, I gave this one a C. Trey Smith, I think, is the biggest thing they did. Bringing back in the best guard in football, arguably, is a big deal. Marquise Brown resigning, Jalen Moore, obviously, the contract that they handed out early into the day one of free agency. We'll see how it turns out. I think it could be a move that will absolutely bite them in the butt, or it'll be a solid tackle for the next 2 years. So we'll
Yep.
see. They just need to protect Patrick Mahomes, and ultimately that's what they're doing. But none of the moves really wowed me for a team that's one of the other favorites to win the Super Bowl. So
Sure. I'm slightly higher, I think, because I'm agreeing with all the points you made so far. I like the Nick Bolton re-signing. I know a lot of people out there are saying that he's a bit overrated, but I think in that Spagnuolo system, he has performed, and I think
Yeah.
they got him for pretty good deal, in my opinion. Christian Fulton, former Titan, former Charger, still fairly young guy. He's got some talent. I think that's a fair deal for him as well. And then, yeah, I'll echo all that you said there. So maybe didn't do as much as you'd like, but I think it's fine.
they can get away with it. I think that as long as you have 15 back there playing quarterback, you don't really need to make splash moves in free agency. You just need to keep the team around him.
Yeah, yeah. So then moving on to the Vegas Raiders, another team that had one of my favorite cycles so far at this point. I think Jeremy Chin is a good signing. I talked about re-signing Malcolm Kunsey there. Obviously, they extended Max Crosby when they did, so then they didn't have to outbid him with Myles Garrett. Maybe not outbid's the right word, but beat that contract, I should say. Alex Kappa, vet who played in Cincinnati for a while, good signing there too. And then Geno Smith. We talked about it at length in our last video, but I think this is a good move for them, pairing him back up with Pete Carroll, getting their guy in there for obviously the foreseeable future. I don't think it entirely takes them out of the quarterback market in the draft, but again, it gives them that flexibility like we talked about.
Yeah, and I could have been higher on this actually. I think revisiting the Raiders and the Seahawks offseason, like especially considering the trade is the big thing that is revolving around both those teams. I like it for both teams, and I'm starting to become more interested in what the Raiders are going to do as well as the Seahawks. But Max Crosby bringing him in for a massive deal, huge, keeping him in Las Vegas and keeping him happy was one of the top priorities. So he's obviously returning. Geno Smith, like you said, I think it's going to be really good for the Raiders. I think it's going to be really good for Brock Bowers as well. It'll be interesting to see what they do there at
Yes, good
6,
point.
is if they go offensive weapon. Like I know Tet is an interesting spot. That's one of my favorite destinations for him. Do we see Ashton Genty here? Do we see a Bears trade to give to Ashton Genty? There's a lot of opportunity for the Raiders to make some interesting things happen. So ultimately, see what they end up doing. And then we gave it a B overall grade, B plus for you, B for me. And then Los Angeles Chargers.
Yeah. I'm a tad bit lower. I don't really love what they've done so far, but I do like the Najee Harris signing. I think that was a great signing. We talked about it again when we kind of had the giggles on our last video, but that signing overall was very good. I think it fits really well with that offense stylistically with what Harbaugh wants to do. I think that was a great signing. I know I'll let you talk about Mekhi Becton a little bit there. But they got Elijah Molden there on a really good deal, I think, as well. Another former Titan that was probably let go a little bit too early in Tennessee, but he ended up playing decently well for them. So I think that's a fair deal for him too. And then, yeah, that's all I want to talk about. Go ahead.
Yeah, B grade for me. I really like their offseason. Najee Harris, one of my favorite backs, I guess in free agency, but there's not really a ton of them. No, I think Najee Harris is a great player. I think he's going to be great for the Chargers in that bruiser system, and that kind of transitions nicely to Mekhi Becton, who was my favorite. Next to Will Fries, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, Mekhi Becton was my favorite offensive lineman in the free agency, and that offensive line for the Chargers is going to be a bunch of maulers, and I think that's exactly what Harbaugh wants, and that's exactly what he got.
100%.
And then Tier Tart is a plus D lineman I wanted to talk about as well, so I'm interested in
Yes.
Tier Tart to see
Another
how he
former
does there.
Titan.
Former Titan, yeah, all the former Titans making some moves here, and then the other side of LA with the Rams.
Yeah. I think just quickly, the re-signing of Alaric Johnson was a good move. Tutu Atwell, I think, is going to be a decent wide receiver 3 for them going forward, as they already have. I think biggest thing, of course, they didn't have to trade Matthew Stafford. This probably would have been a Sam Darnold destination if they would have. So, who's to say there exactly? But then Devontae, I think, will slot in nicely. Again, we talked about that in our last video. Overall, I think this has been pretty decent for them, I would say, for the most part.
Yeah. And I won't go too much into depth. I think Poona Ford re-signing is on a really friendly deal for the caliber of player, is really big for him. And then Stafford, bringing him back is a big deal. And then Devontae is an upgrade over Cooper Kupp at this point. So overall, I like it. B- is a good grade for them. Miami Dolphins. I went C- here. You went C- as well. I actually like the Zach Wilson signing more than most. I think bringing in someone who can play. Obviously, you can't trust Tua's health, so I think that bringing in Zach Wilson might be even one of their best moves of free agency. James Daniels signing a 3-year deal is big as well. Offensive line is pretty terrible there in Miami. They're giving Houston Texans a run for their money for worst offensive line in football. So this is another team who I assume will address offensive line early in the draft, but I think it's just a C- grade. Nothing crazy for me.
Yeah, I don't like what they've done at offensive line this cycle so far. They did grab Nick Westbrook-Akine away from the Titans here on this one. A lot of Titans fans upset about that one just because he's been such a steady Eddie for the Titans, but I think, and we'll get to them in a minute here, of course, but I think that's a fine wide receiver 3 for them, just another guy who's consistent like you talked about, so that's pretty good. I'm going to agree with you. I think Zach Wilson's their best signing on this entire list. Somebody who I think could actually really be a good fit in that offensive scheme. And, they're not necessarily wanting him to play at any point, but they had to get some sort of veteran in there who could operate the offense with, again, the assumption that Tua could easily go down once again. So they haven't really had that. They've gone through, Tyler Huntley and Skylar Thompson and some of these other guys who just aren't able to keep them in games if Tua does go down. So I think this is a good move from that standpoint.
Yeah, and this was my favorite Shador destination before obviously this happened. It was never going to happen, but I think
he wasn't going there anyways.
It would have been a fun thing for me.
We talked about the fit.
Yeah. So I like Zach Wilson here. I think it makes a lot of sense as well. Talk about the Minnesota Vikings. This is. I'll let you go first.
Homer grade. Let me first say.
Hold on. Very good. No, definitely had some Homer tint to it, but no. This was the winners of the free agency for me personally. I'll let you go first since I probably got a little bit more to say.
Yeah, I won't go too into detail because I'm sure you got a lot to say here. But no, I think this was a great offseason for them. Again, another team that's in that window, and I think as a result of that, let's make some smart, calculated moves in the cycle while you can. Obviously, Will Fries being the big one there. I think I'll talk about Aaron Jones just for a second. I'm sure you'll hit on the other ones, but a guy who you showed me some videos, and I just happened to see Kevin O'Connell talking a lot about Aaron Jones being a great locker room guy, just a kind of an underrated acquisition for them last season. A guy who's really brought a lot of value to them in more than one way. So I think it was good on them to be able to re-sign him what in my opinion seems to be a pretty good deal. He's aging, but I like that move. So I'll turn it over to you and tell me what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'll burn through a lot of my thoughts pretty quick because I could talk for this for as long as we've been recording. So I'll go pretty quick. Aaron Jones, obviously, before we recorded this, about 15 minutes before, they made the move for Jordan Mason. So bringing in the complement running back there, more of a bruising back with the 49ers, led the team in rushing last year for them. So I think that's a great move. Basically, what we gave away to the Texans, we basically returned in Jordan Mason. So net positive. Will Fries, my favorite offensive lineman, we signed to a mega 5-year, $88 million deal. 26 years old, pairing him up with, Ryan Kelly's right there below him. Yeah, Ryan Kelly, bolstering up that interior offensive line, which was a big problem for us in the playoffs and in the entire season, quite frankly. Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, fantastic pass rushing defensive lineman, and on the interior, that was one thing we really needed. Eric Wilson, we're bringing him back, good special teamer. Byron Murphy, bringing him back. Pro Bowl season last year. Theo Jackson is a great re-signing, and then Harry the Hitman Smith coming back for his 14th season. First ballot Hall of Famer right there. So you got a thought?
Say one more thing. Yeah, I think that, and again, maybe I could have been a little bit higher here, but I wanted to even out the grade a little bit. But One thing I will say is I think this is one of the few off seasons this so far that truly allows for the team to go best player available. And I know we talked about that off camera, but it really allows them to go best player available because they filled some needs. They made some moves that I think allows them to, again, just take whatever comes to them in the draft. Or if they love a guy, maybe they can move up or down depending on the spot, whatever the case is. But I think it really allows them to just take best player on their board no matter the position.
Yeah, it's a great point. And if someone like Malachi Starks is there at 24, I'm doing backflips on draft night. So we'll see. We'll see how that turns out. But I mean, I could talk about all these guys. Like I said, this is an A grade for me. Winners of free agency so far. So we'll keep it pushing to the New England Patriots. I'll let you talk since that was a little bit of a word vomit from me.
Yeah, I think, again, we talked about this off camera. The Milton Williams signing does a lot for this grade for both of us, realistically. I don't think any of these other moves really moved me too much. They wanted to get Chris Godwin, it sounds like, or they definitely sound like they were being aggressive in the receiver market. Didn't really end up getting anybody, obviously, aside from Mac Hollins, so you have to think they'll address that in the draft, or maybe a trade happens. Who knows at this point? But honestly, I think my favorite signing aside from Milton Williams is going to be Morgan Moses, another guy who's a vet, can lead that locker room a little, or that room a little bit, that offensive line room, can still give you some value playing either side of the offensive line. I don't like the Harold Landry signing. A few of his numbers are a bit misleading for those of you who didn't watch a lot of Titans games, which I understand last year, but a guy who I think was a necessary cut for the Titans. Made sense that he was going to pair back up with Mike Vrabel here. So I don't think that was a great move for them. That's way too big of a contract for an aging guy who's never the same after his, I can't remember if it was an ACL or Achilles injury a few years ago, but just not been the same guy since. And then we talked about Carlton Davis being one of the worst acquisitions we felt like during that first wave there. So I'm not really a big fan of much. Aside from Milton Williams, I think this saves the grade a lot personally.
Yeah, and C minus because it could have been worse, as you mentioned, that Carlton Davis contract. I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of the player overall. So contract for me makes no sense. Obviously, Vrabel bringing in a lot of guys he's familiar with Austin Hooper and
that was
Harold
to be
Landry.
expected.
Yeah, to be expected. So I'm a little bit more forgiving on this grade because they're in a position to where they just need talent. So shelling out bad money to get decent players to help build the foundation of the team, I'm more okay with
too.
in a situation like this. And then obviously Milton Williams being maybe the best free agent available overall is big for them. Obviously, getting him to flip from Carolina to New England was big. So C minus for me. Maybe could have went a little higher, but I was being pretty strict with these grades, so I was strict with the Patriots. New Orleans Saints. You got any thoughts?
Not really, honestly. I mean, it's just kind of middle of the road.
Yeah.
I mean, again, who knows what the Saints? I mean, the Saints can't really do a lot. They're in cap hell, like we've talked about several times.
Every year it seems like it.
I know. You got to wonder one of these years if they'll get out of that cycle. I guess they will eventually. But I like the Justin Reed signing. I think it's a good pair with Tyrann Mathieu. We talked about that a little bit in our last video. Cam Jordan obviously returning for so he's not retiring or anything. Chase Young, I don't really know about that deal exactly. He's still kind of young guy and got a chance there. I don't know. I don't really love a ton of the moves there, but I like Justin Reed the most. There are
a few teams where it's just like, I don't know. I mean, like, what am I supposed to say? Same thing with I said, like Dante Pettis. Okay, Cam Jordan coming back for his 95th season, like that's fine. There's not a ton to say about this. Chase Young is like, a lot of what we go off of because I'm not super in tune with the New Orleans Saints. I can't be in tune with all 32 teams to the extent I am the Vikings. So I refer to my friends of these teams to see what their kind of thoughts are. So that's what is reflected in the grade here. One of our friends is not super keen on the offseason so far. Just they haven't done a lot on a team that's probably not going to do anything. So
but again, it's like, can we really take any of these moves seriously for the Saints when they're in the situation they're in?
Yeah,
like, I don't know if we're really going to be able to expect that much out of them in the offseason when they're in the situation that they're in, and they just need to break that cycle. So I think that's why I'm a little bit better than average here because, I like the Justin Reed signing, and again, there's not much they could have done anyways. So.
Maybe it's just a nothing offseason for a, with all due respect, nothing team at the moment. Like, we'll see how it transpires, but not a super big fan. New York Giants. I think that the secondary is what really brings this grade up for me. Paulson Adebo is one of my favorite free agents. He ends up going to New York, obviously, and they're pairing him with Javon Holland there at safety. I really like it so far. I'm kind of gathering my thoughts here as I'm looking around. Darius Slayton, I don't know what in the world, 750 yards last year gets you 12 million a year, but again, they're kind of in a similar position. Let's just bring talent in. And then obviously people who want to go to New York under that front office and that head. Gosh, I'm ripping some of these teams, but anybody who wants to come to the Giants, they're like, all right, we'll pay you decent money to come play for us. So
Yeah.
B minus grade, but it's the secondary that does that for me.
Yeah, Tommy DeVito, biggest. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But no, I will say on the quarterback note, it is going to be interesting to see what happens here because I think this is the biggest wild card, of course, so far. Because very clearly need a quarterback as a need, first of all, from a team standpoint. But again, their owner has made it very clear, like this is Joe Shane, Brian Dable's like literal last chance, and so. You can certainly make the argument that's not the best place you want to be when you're acting out of desperation. We'll see if that means they do sign Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, if that means they pair him with a rookie quarterback. I think they'd love to have Cam Ward. It seems like Titans might go that way, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing to take away here. I like the Javon Holland deal too, and Paulson Adebo shored up that secondary a little bit. I think they're pretty confident in the team they have. They just really need better quarterback play. So I think that domino has yet to fall. So we'll see what that means for them going forward.
And at this point, it looks like that domino is going to end up falling in late April because we haven't seen a quarterback move for them as of today. So it's looking like QB is going to be the play, even if they can't get Cam Ward.
It'll be tough if they're in a position where they have to take Shedeur Sanders number 3.
Yeah.
And again, our viewers may disagree strongly on that, but you and I, and it sounds like consensus is kind of finally catching up to what we've been saying for a few months now.
Yeah,
is that Shedeur
like
is just not a top 5. I mean, look, just had to throw that out there.
Yep.
But Shedeur, he's just not really a top 5 guy in our opinion. And so I think that people are coming around to the idea, like, if that ends up being their only move, again, that's acting out of desperation. It's just not going to behoove them, I think, going forward.
That's going to put you on a string because everyone knows that is a reach move at that spot. So if Shedeur hypothetically goes to the Giants at 3 and really doesn't blow it out of the water, like he doesn't absolutely kick butt, it's going to look bad for everyone involved.
Especially when there's going to be either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter on the board.
That's a good point.
On one of those two guys.
That's a good point.
And again, you just don't want to be in that desperation spot, in my opinion.
This is a horrible situation for the Giants. So
I think they kind of have to land Aaron Rodgers if we're being honest here.
Yeah.
I think that's like, and clearly that was shown by the fact they were gunning super hard for Matthew Stafford, didn't get that deal done. They're gunning hard for Aaron Rodgers right now. It doesn't sound like money's an issue for what they're willing to shell out for him. So they're really backed into a corner right now.
Yeah.
Not a great place to be.
Definitely not. Other side of New Jersey, I should say. Graham, you got this one?
Yeah, so I talked about it a little bit. I think Jamin Sherwood was a good re-signing at the linebacker spot for them. We talked about Justin Fields as being a spot for him for a few months now. I think that makes sense as well. It's hard to fully get behind the contract he's gotten so far, considering that the Bears willingly traded him, for scraps, and then only started for 5 or 6 games for Pittsburgh when Russell Wilson wasn't really that great for them either towards the end of the season. So it's kind of hard to get behind that contract. But I like the idea where, again, you got a guy who can play quarterback for you, young, got some upside, going to be a different type of quarterback in the building like you've talked about a few times. Other than that, though, nothing like too special, I would say. I think they're going to want to be one of those like draft and develop teams like we've talked about for a few of these teams so far. So I think less was more for them in this situation, to be honest with you.
And I think that's a good distinction to make. I think going forward, that's kind of going to be their identity is like we're going to build the draft and we're going to take care of players that we bring in. Justin Fields, I think, is interesting for the Jets. I like the move. We're going to see if he's a franchise guy. Probably not, given what we know about Justin Fields. And then the other move I wanted to highlight real quick was Josh Myers, bringing in Josh Myers to play center. Familiarity with Justin Fields, obviously his center at Ohio State there, so I like that move. And then Jamin Sherwood, as you've already alluded to as well. C grade for me. The rest of the moves don't really move me. But I think it's okay for the Jets where they're at. And then Philadelphia Eagles, I gave them a B+. They're the offensive line factory, so I think trading and getting someone like Kenyon Green, despite them losing a ton of offensive line, is going to help them out. I think Josh Uche is still like an underrated pass rusher in the league, so I think 1 year, 1.25 for him is pretty crazy. So we'll see what that turns into. Zach Bond, arguably one of the best linebackers in football, bringing him back. Saquon Barkley. I'm taking all of your talking points, but
No, you're
Saquon,
good. I got one
Saquon
more thing
Barkley.
I'll say.
Yeah, Saquon Barkley on the 2-year deal, well worth the money, and I expect him to be a beast for the next 2 years moving forward too. So B plus for me.
Yeah, I'll echo everything you said. And the only thing I'll add is, again, how he's going to do and how he thinks. We talked about earlier. He was able to trade Kenny Pickett for, whatever that ended up being, a fifth-round pick or something, which is crazy. So, yeah, I think it's a fine offseason cycle for them. I think they were clearly okay with letting Josh Sweat and Milton Williams go. They're going to continue to build up the D-line through the draft. We know they are. I think it's going to be another trenches type of draft for them. It's going to be interior offensive line. It's going to be D-line. So I like it for them.
Yeah, one of the sneakier off seasons for me for a team that obviously just won the Super Bowl. Kind of hard to rebound considering all those guys are getting big contracts, but I think with what they did, it's a really good off season for them. Pittsburgh Steelers, C grade. We're just throwing out C grades like it's nothing. I somehow it had slipped my mind that they had signed Darius Slay. That's fine, veteran corner there. And then everybody knows how I feel about DK Metcalf. I'm not a big DK Metcalf fan. I don't really like pairing players with similar play styles. I've already mentioned that or I've mentioned that to you off camera. Not that DK and George Pickens are 1-for-1, but they're both big-bodied, like deep threats. Obviously, DK being more of the burner and George Pickens being more of the contested catch guy. I don't really care for either of them, to be quite frank. C grade for me. They didn't do anything that really stood out.
Yeah, and I'll echo what you said in the last video, which is I understand why they did the DK trade, but
Yeah.
I don't think it was necessarily the best move they could have made. So, not great there. And then again, what do they do at quarterback? Did they end up getting Aaron Rodgers? Did they get Russ back? I doubt that happens. If they don't get Russ back, do they draft a guy? Like, who knows? I mean, I think it was Todd McShay talking about it in his podcast, potentially a landing spot for Tyler Shuck. I think this would actually be a great spot for him. I would actually love that move for them with a guy who's got some maturity, I think would operate well in that system. I could easily see that being a landing spot for them potentially. I don't know if I would do that at pick number 21 or whatever they're picking in the
Right.
in the first round, but I mean, who knows? I actually would like that a lot. So I don't know. We'll see. It's been okay. Neither one of us are big fans of the DK trade. So
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And this is just kind of a thought just came to me. We'll kind of wrap this up so we can keep the video moving. But it'll be interesting to see where these Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson go. Because given the quarterback class, it not being a class where you can take 2 or 3 first-round quarterbacks, when do teams start to feel like their big board and their situation is going to match up with the quarterbacks in those spots in the draft, like in the second and the third round? So it's like, do you reach on a quarterback in the first and take a gross reach on a player that shouldn't be there, assuming these teams don't get, Aaron Rodgers or Russ? So it'll be interesting to see because the Giants, the Steelers, and the who do we just talk about is also in that boat.
Giants, Steelers, I don't know.
Saints? We talked about somebody. Either way.
Giant. No, you already said Giants. I don't know. Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point you make there because, again, this class had draft class, I should say, at quarterback, had a chance to be like the 2022 draft class. I mean, I think it's a little better than that draft class, in my opinion. That's with Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Matt Corral, all those guys. I think Cam Ward is obviously far and away better than all of those guys. But the rest of the class, maybe, and I think, again, a little better this year than that year. But, again, I think the reason that those guys fell so far, too, was also due to the fact there wasn't as much desperation for a quarterback, but there's so many quarterback needy teams out there right now that I think you're right. It's going to be a situation where we're going to see a lot of those guys go in the second round just because, again, they need it so badly. And Todd McShay, again, just to point out what he says, he's dang near 100% certain Jackson Dart is going round 1, which he should never go round 1 in my opinion.
Right.
But, it's probably going to happen. There's so many quarterback needy teams out there.
And I could see why, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, I could see why a team would be more interested in Jackson Dart than Shedeur Sanders, which might pop up in a mock if we end up getting there. So we'll see. We'll see what that turns into. But
I don't know.
Maybe it's a move that I make. You don't have to make it. I might.
I would say I'm not the biggest Jackson Dart fan. I like Shuck better than him personally. I know he was ranked a little higher in our rankings video, but yeah. Anyways, let's move on past the quarterbacks a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. We got sidetracked. We'll keep it pushing.
No, I think the funniest thing about the 49ers here, and this has not been a point that's not going on here. I mean, Mac Jones, Kyle Shanahan finally got his guy, is what everybody's making the joke about. Like,
Right.
that year they drafted Trey Lance, and the rumor was that Mac Jones was the guy they really wanted. Obviously, that wasn't the case because they didn't take him, but it is just kind of a funny joke that he's in that system. So I think a good backup, especially for their system there. So I think that's a fine deal. They don't have a ton of money to spend either. Another team that's kind of retooling a little bit this offseason. They're letting go of some big contracts, some older players. So it's going to be interesting to see where they land because they still have Kyle Shanahan at the helm. It's hard to see them not being good with him there. And John Lynch, obviously, as GM. So we'll see, but they're clearly going through a retooling right now.
They're gearing up for that Brock Purdy contract, and it's evident in the moves they made. Obviously, they're a talented team, so they lost a lot. And you can see on the screen here all the one-year Band-Aid moves they have. So I think in the situation they're at, they did okay, which is what the C grade is for.
Sorry.
Overall, you're good. Overall, the moves I'm not super keen on, but I think given the situation, I'm a little bit more forgiving when Kyle Juszczyk is your most notable free agent signing or re-signing, I should say. So I'm not super keen on any of those other guys, but they're also an offensive line factory. So bringing in someone like Ben Barch could be solid for them. So we'll end up seeing with that. Moving on to the Seahawks, and I'll go ahead and just touch on this real quick.
Yeah.
Sam Darnold, obviously former Viking, got that big contract. Looks like the franchise guy based on the deal. We'll see where it goes. Like I said, I'm starting to come around to the Seahawks offseason. Cooper Kupp yesterday, being in addition to that locker room, Seattle native there, so that I like that signing. And then DeMarcus Lawrence, I think, is a decent signing for them as well. Josh Jones on a one-year deal is solid. This offensive line is pretty bad. I assume they're going to address offensive line pretty early as well in the draft. But I think with
guard.
yeah, especially the interior part. Yeah, certainly. But I think with where they're at, and then Ernest Jones as well in that 3-year deal, I really like. So I like the moves they made, and I'm going to give it a B+ for that.
Yeah, we talked about Sam Darnold, last time plenty. Ernest Jones, one of my favorite moves. I liked Ernest Jones a lot when he was traded from the Rams to the Titans early in the season last year. It just didn't work out. Titans were in a spot they needed to get rid of some of those contracts or people they would have had to pay. I think that's a very fair deal for Ernest Jones. That defense really turned around when he got there in Seattle, so I think that was a great re-signing for them. Cooper Kupp, I'm coming more around to it, but we talked about this again off camera. Not sure I love the fit with him and Jackson Dart there together, both kind of being primarily succeeding the most out of the slot. I think either one of them could play on the outside potentially, but I'm just not. I don't know. It's not. I don't know. It's what did I say? Jackson Dart. I meant
You did say Jackson Dart.
Jackson Smith and Jigba. Yes,
We knew
I
what you
think,
meant.
Yeah. I caught it after I said it this time.
Yeah.
Jackson Smith and Jigba, and again, Cooper Kupp kind of play similarly, or at least they operate the best in the same spot. And so I think that's, you want to have a complement ideally. So we'll see how that goes. But I think it was good to land a receiver when they obviously needed one. And he'll fit that Clint Kubiak offense very well too. So
Yeah, and real quick, you'd already mentioned the Clint Kubiak offense. I was actually going to come back to that, so I'm glad you said it. It seems like Clint Kubiak is like a run-first guy, so they want to establish that run-first identity, and maybe Cooper Kupp and Jackson Smith, who are solid plus blockers, I would say, that might turn into a situation. Obviously, Sam Darnold ran a ton of play
Good point.
action in Minnesota, so he's used to having his back to the defense on those long developing play actions, and having a solid run game under Clint Kubiak might open up situations to where you can kind of test downfield a little bit. So I'm when I start to think about it more from a ball knower, like a real football perspective, I'm starting to like the moves a little bit more. But we'll keep it pushing.
I can see the vision based on that. Again, Clint Kubiak coming from that 49ers tree, like I can see it. I see the value there.
Yeah.
So. The Bucks, pretty good offseason cycle for them. A lot of the grade for me is retaining Chris Godwin at a cheaper deal than he would have got with, like we talked about, the Patriots probably being that other team that was in the running for him. Sounds like he could have got $20 million plus more. Like it would have been he turned down a lot of money to stay there. So I think that was certainly a benefit for them. Excuse me. And then the other one we talked about last time was Hassan Reddick. I think this is maybe a little bit of a steep prove it deal type of thing for this guy. But again, he was one of the best edge rushers in the league when he was with the Eagles a few years ago. Obviously had some weird situation last year with the Jets, so it'll remain to be seen there. But I like a few of the moves they made. They've kind of kept their team intact in a lot of ways, and they're improving in some areas too.
And the reason I gave this team a B+ is honestly, obviously I like the football moves. I think, like you mentioned, Chris Godwin coming back, Levante David coming back, it speaks a lot to the culture that Tampa Bay is building. So I think this is a grade that I'm giving for the future. Like this is a grade that I'm giving for next year's free agency. Teams are going to remember that hey, Chris Godwin took a pay cut to stay here when he could have went to New England and got a bag. So
Interesting point. Yeah.
it's a point that is kind of out there and maybe not like on the nose for this specific free agency class. But I'm interested to see where that looks like next year. And then Hassan Reddick is also an interesting signing as well, losing Joe Tryon Joe Tryon Shoyinka. So I think Anthony, I butchered that name.
That sounds good enough.
Close enough. Joe Tryon, thank you. Yeah, Hassan Reddick's an upgrade over him, so I think it's a B plus grade for that reason. And then I'll touch on the Titans first because you probably have more to say on this. I went C plus. I'll let you talk about the Dan Moore signing. I think it's a solid signing. I'm not super high on it one way or the other. Kevin Zeitler is probably my favorite signing. I think it's the best signing. Huge move for them. And then the rest is kind of just like but I think that with what they did on the offensive line, it's enough to bring them from a C to a C plus to me.
Yeah, I'll kind of run through these like you did with the Vikings here. I don't want to belabor the point too much here. So Xavier Woods, I don't love that deal. One thing that the Titans clearly made a point of this offseason cycle is to acquire guys who are durable. If you look at the percentage of snaps that the guys that they have re-signed or signed, I should say, have played, it's in the like over 95%. Like these guys don't miss games. And I think from that standpoint, it's a good approach. And again, this is a team that needs to not make a ton of moves after last offseason, making so many knee-jerk moves. I think that the philosophy is there. So I like it from that standpoint. In terms of the re-signings, it didn't include Daryl Baker Jr. on here, corner who filled in for Cheeto Awuzie, who actually just got cut today. He stepped in and played really well for the Titans there. They obviously didn't tender Ryan Stonehouse, one of the best punters in the NFL, but they did sign Johnny Hecker to fit with the new special teams coordinator that they hired. I'm agreeing with you. Kevin Zeitler, probably the best signing on this list so far. Dan Moore, I talked about it last time. Clear overpay, but they know that. This was a move to fit. It's a 2-for-1 kind of situation where they can kick Latham to right tackle and then get a decent left tackle. And again, a guy with some young and some upside potentially as well. Van Jefferson, one of my least favorite signings here. I think they need to bolster that receiver room quite a bit. I've been saying that for a while now. Calvin Ridley is really the only guy who's got anything in the tank there in that receiving room. And, that's not saying a ton, honestly. And then the last point I'll make here is that Brandon Allen being the quarterback move that they made is a pretty clear indication that they're going Cam Ward to the top of the draft, which, again, you guys know I can certainly get behind. I am a Will Levis fan. Again, kind of a hot take there, but let's get a guy who I think where Cam Ward is the clear upgrade over Will Levis is two of the biggest areas of where Will Levis was not good. And one is going to be when the play breaks down. Brian Callahan talked about what's your nervous system like when things don't go well? Will Levis is obviously terrible in that situation. When things are going bad, he makes dumb, boneheaded decisions. Cam Ward, he excels in those situations where he can make things happen. Of course, does make some crazy decisions every once in a while, but it's not because he's flustered necessarily. It's because he just thinks he can make the throw that he can't necessarily make in that situation. So I think that's one big thing there as well. And then pocket navigation. That's the other thing that Will Levis was horrible at, was being able to mitigate a muddy pocket. Cam Ward does that at an elite level like we talked about. So, again, no other quarterback move. To me, Brendan Allen and Will Levis are competing for the number 2 spot. They're taking Cam Ward number 1 at this point. Now, again, we'll see. Maybe they still trade back. I think it's still certainly on the table, especially depending on how desperate the Giants end up getting at 3. Maybe the Browns at 2 if they do love Cam Ward potentially. But I think this is a pretty clear indication at this point that Cam Ward is firmly in play, if not who they're going to be taking in April.
Yeah, I imagine the Giants are blowing up the Titans phone every day. You guys want the third pick? You guys want the third pick? No. This is Cam Ward stamped. I don't think there's. We might disagree on this. I don't think there's any even feasible possibility that it's not Cam Ward. So I'm gonna pen in Cam Ward. At this point, it seems like you're leaning that way as well. But there are some possibilities given what the Giants do at 3.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's funny how just on board I was for team trade back, and then I actually watched Cam Ward's tape, and now I'm like, we got to get this guy.
Yeah.
His leadership, his off the field mentality. again, you guys know I can go on about Cam Ward for days. So let's go ahead and turn over to the last team here on our list, the Washington Commanders. I was pretty harsh on this one here. I'm actually not a fan of really at all of what they've done this offseason. Laramie Tunsil being the big trade they made, obviously still can play at a very high level, improve their offensive line for Jaden Daniels. I think that does make sense. He's an aging guy, though, and, again, he's going to need a contract a few years. Overall, I think that's pretty clearly their best move, so I won't hate on it too much, but I think it makes sense. I'll let you talk about Deebo Samuel a little bit there. I actually think re-signing Marcus Mariota was a great move for them as well. He came in and played very well the times that he did play when Jaden was hurt a few times or when he stepped in late in the game situation. Marcus operated the offense, seamlessly, so I think that was a good move to actually retain him. Javon Kinlaw was one of my least favorite signings this whole offseason cycle. That was a terrible deal, I think. Just a guy who's just not proven that much and didn't warrant that high of a contract. So clear overpay in my opinion here.
Yeah, Javon Kinlaw deal, that's what you get when you're a former first-rounder.
It's true.
Who's still relatively young. So I think that's the deal that you give where it's like maybe he's still got something he hasn't shown yet. So I'm with you. Not a fan of that based on what he's proven on the field. But I guess he's still young. We can see what happens. Relatively young, I should say. Laramie Tunsil is the best move they made so far. Gave up a lot to get him, but I think that it's one of the better offensive tackles in the league. You want to protect your asset in Jaden Daniels. And then Zach Ertz re-signing, he was kind of Jaden's security blanket. He had a really strong season. And then Deebo is like, I really do not like, I don't like Deebo at all. There are a few receivers I feel very strongly about, Deebo being one of them. A fifth rounder for him is like fine, I guess. I just think that there's a lot of problems that come with Deebo Samuel, and I don't think the play, especially outside of the Kyle Shanahan system, is going to be enough to warrant, because what do you do with Deebo? Do you play him as a true receiver? Because I think there are way better options if you're going to do that. If you're going to do that, so I'm not a big fan of it.
Yeah, I was going to say I think he's pretty clearly a gadget guy. Like I think, and again, maybe some people disagree, but to both of us, I'm going to agree with you. Not really a true receiver. Now, I think in that room it could make sense because you've got Terry McLaurin. Maybe they'll look to draft another guy who's more of a true receiver in that room. But they could maybe do some interesting thing with Deebo Samuel. But to me, it's kind of like Austin Eckler last year. Like, they added him as more of like a vet presence, but he's just not the same guy he was. And again, he really was just a good fit for that Chargers system they had a few years ago. And maybe Deebo ends up being the same way, but I think a fifth is not bad value for acquiring him, a guy who can add some gadget type of stuff for them potentially. So
yeah. Well, I think that's all we have. Is that correct?
I think that's it. Yeah. So that was our kind of grading of the free agent cycle so far. Still, of course, a couple of quarterback dominoes to be made here at this one. Micah doing the skull chant. Again, a little bit of homer grade on that one, but we'll let it slide.
I'm fired up, man. I'm fired up for the season.
So, we'll see what happens. We'll be coming out with a mock draft here, post free agency. Maybe you want to see if anything happens in the quarterback market in the next couple of days before we get that out there. But we'll be coming out with that. We've also got a draft My Guys video coming out here soon. We'll talk about that when that comes out too. So a couple of things coming down the pipeline here, gearing up to April. It's an exciting time. So we will be talking to you guys soon. Thanks so much for tuning in with us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Till next time.
See you in the next one.